guys, welcome to your science lesson for today. We are on lesson 8.3. I hope that you guys are all doing well, staying safe, and having as much fun as possible during your quarantine. So we are going to continue on. Today's essential question, we're going to see what happens to the pieces of rocks that are weathered and eroded. So far we have learned about weathering. Weathering is the process that breaks down rock into smaller and smaller pieces. Erosion is the process that moves those pieces. And now today we're talking about what happens to those pieces that get moved. So we're going to look at the objective, explore what happens to pieces of rock after they are weathered and eroded. So for a quick review, what is the difference between erosion and weathering? And I just kind of explained that, so hopefully you can tell me. So if you need to pause and write that down, what is the difference between erosion and weathering? All right, if you're coming back to the video, let's take a look. This is super important that you understand, and I hope that this is kind of all coming together for you and making sense, because these three things go together, but they are different processes in this overall process of shaping the land. So weathering is what happens first, okay? Weathering is the natural process that causes rock to break down over time. So when rock slowly breaks down into smaller pieces, this is weathering. Then erosion comes after. Erosion is the moving or shifting of those smaller pieces of broken rock by natural forces. And remember, those forces can be wind, it can be water, and it can even be ice in the form of glaciers. So when glaciers are pushing down and they kind of moving the earth, okay? So remember this is important. You got to remember this process. Weathering happens first, then erosion can take place, and then what happens next is called deposition, and that's what we're talking about today. So what happens to the pieces of rock after weathering and erosion? Where do they go? That is called deposition. So make sure you write this down and understand the definition of deposition. Deposition occurs when sediments, soil, and rocks eroded by wind, water, or ice get deposited or dropped off in a different location. Okay, so think of the word deposit, all right? If I tell you to take the money and go deposit it in the bank, you're going to take money and you're going to go put it into the bank so that your bank checking account, you would be adding money to it. That's a deposit, okay? So a deposit is when you add something into a new location. Deposition is like dropping off something in a different location. So go through this process with me. Weathering, the big rock is slowly broken down into smaller and smaller pieces. Erosion moves those pieces. Deposition drops them off at a new location. So when can deposition happen? It's when the movement stops and the pieces are in a new location. Another definition on this page, it says deposition occurs when sediments get deposited or dropped off. A sediment is just the pieces of rock and minerals. So those pieces of broken down rock, minerals, soil, remains of plants, animals, all those things, those little pieces that are getting moved through erosion, those are called sediments. Okay, so when those sediments get dropped in a new location, that is deposition. So the process goes weathering, erosion, and then deposition, and it just keeps happening over and over, right? Another cycle. All right, so deposition occurs when water carrying the sediment slows down. So if water is flowing really fast, it's going to be moving the sediment, right? When the water slows down, it starts to leave the sediment behind, and that's when the sediment is deposited into a new location. Wind carrying the sediment can die down too. So if it's really windy, at that point, that's eroding and moving the sediment. As soon as the wind dies down, the sediment is going to stop moving. That's when the deposition happens, when the sediment settles, when it stops moving. Glaciers carrying the sediment melt. So glaciers are moving masses of ice, right? They're slowly moving. So they're pushing sediment along with them. When that glacier melts, it is no longer pushing that sediment. The sediment's in a new location. That's when it is deposited. That's when deposition has happened. Deposition creates landforms, okay? So things such as alluvial fans. Here's an alluvial fan, okay? This was created by deposition, materials moving from one place to another. Deltas. This is a river delta. And things like beaches. You know what a beach looks like, right? So beaches are the result of deposition. The rock got broken down into smaller pieces. It was eroded, which means it was moved to a new location, and it was left at that spot that is now the beach. So that's where the deposition took place, on the beach there, Nader Beach. And then here's sand dunes. Some of you may have been to the sand dunes, right? Riding your four-wheelers and things like that. Sand dunes are also created through deposition. So remember these, maybe jot these down. There is a question on your Google form asking you which ones are created by deposition, what kind of landforms. All right, in the front of your workbook for your scientific principles, I really apologize, but I could not remember if you guys had actually written down number 3. So if you have not written down number 3, check that. I know for sure we have done number 1 and number 2. So number 1, let's just review our scientific principles. On Earth, water is located in 6 reservoirs that vary in size. Number 2, water moves in specific ways between reservoirs. Water can flow, evaporate, condensate and precipitate, and infiltrate. Those are the ways that water moves. Number 3, this is one I'm not sure if you wrote down yet. We covered it, but I don't know if we actually wrote it down. Water is continually changing phases and moving between reservoirs. There is no new water being created. This is called the water cycle. We spent lots of time on the water cycle, right? So there's your scientific principle for that if we did not write it down yet. Now we're moving on to number 4 and number 5 today. Number 4 says Earth material is constantly changed and shaped by various processes. And these are the ones we have learned so far last week and this week. Weathering, erosion, and deposition. And I want them in that order because it's important that you understand. The weathering happens first, the breaking down of the rock into smaller pieces. Erosion happens next, the moving of that rock. And then finally, deposition, when that rock is placed in a new place. The moving stops and it's in a new place. Number 5, small changes over a long period of time can have big effects on Earth material. So that's what we've been talking about this week. It's these small changes that happen. You can't see them on a day-to-day basis, but over time, those really small changes have a big effect. So please write those down in your notebook. Unpause your video when you're done. So pause so you can get those written down. All right, and here's the big question that you need to be thinking of, and I've kind of gone over this over and over and over today, right? Describe how weathering, erosion, and deposition work together to shape the Earth's surface. So remember, weathering happens, so tell me what happens in weathering. Then erosion happens, so tell me what happens in erosion. And then deposition happens, so tell what happens in deposition. This is a question on your Google form today, and it is the one that I have to grade. So again, your Google form is not going to give you an accurate score right away. When you press submit, it's going to tell you that you missed 3 points because of this question. This question is worth 3 points. Can you guess why it's worth 3 points? There's 3 things you need to tell me, right? Describe how weathering, erosion, and deposition, all 3 of them, work together to shape the Earth's surface. All right, so please go do your Google form. After you do your reading, there is a reading today, reading 8.3, okay? Flooding the canyon. So this tells about how they purposefully flooded the Grand Canyon and why they did that. So it's a really short article, only 1 page long, but please make sure you do that. And then you have your Google form, 8.3 Earth Science, and it's on deposition. But there is that response question that I need you to answer and tell me about all 3 things and how they work together. All right, guys, do a good job, and I will